to be progressive enough to want to put together this type of webinar speaks volumes, mashallah, for Bayan. And I want to thank all the speakers for joining us on this afternoon. And I want to thank you all for joining us this afternoon on a Sunday. You could be doing anything. You could be hanging out with family, but you chose to be here to listen to this vital information and to be a part of this vital work. And alhamdulillah, one of the opportunities that we have here at Islamic Relief is partnering up with organizations like Bayan and to be able to offer support for them in these types of works, but also to be able to then utilize their network and to offer additional support and trainings in the disaster chaplaincy space. And so, inshallah, with the help of Bayan and Islamic Relief and our national partner, the National Disaster Interfaith Services out of New York City, we at Islamic Relief have actually been hosting a number of disaster chaplaincy training classes over the last few years, where we're training individuals like yourselves to become certified disaster chaplains that will be utilized during disasters and to be able to provide chaplaincy again for these individuals who are going through these horrible traumatic events. And one thing that we've noticed time and time again, I mean, alhamdulillah, again, we've grown in the disaster response space over the last decade within the disaster response community here in the United States. But one key area where the Muslims are severely lacking is disaster chaplaincy. And we've been approached by a number of organizations, basically asking, hey, where are the Muslims? We need Muslim chaplains out here. It's inevitable that our communities now are starting to be affected by these disasters because we've grown in numbers, right? But more so also, we want to be able to serve our neighbors. We want to be able to serve our fellow countrymen. And so we've hosted a number of these trainings. We've trained in the last 2 or 3 years, I believe about 65 individuals in disaster chaplaincy. And alhamdulillah, we have our latest training session is going to be coming up later this year in partnership with Bayan. Inshallah, we're looking to host our next round of disaster chaplaincy training at Bayan's facilities in Chicago in October. The dates are October 5th, 6th, and 7th. These are Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. It's about a 2.5-day training. It's very intensive. Excuse me. But at the end of this training, every individual will receive a certificate of completion and actually be certified as a disaster chaplain so that they can go out and begin to be able to provide these services to their communities in need. And inshallah, you all, as you join and become part of our disaster chaplaincy network, you actually become part of our specialized team here at Islamic Relief, a specialized team of volunteers that there aren't very many of that will be utilized to deploy on disasters. And when disasters happen and Islamic Relief is responding, Islamic Relief will take care of all of the logistics involved. So as long as you have the time and the ability to deploy and take time off of work or whatever, Islamic Relief will take care of the flights, the hotels, the lodging, the food, everything is on us. So nothing to worry about in that regard. We just need your time and your dedication, inshallah. So I invite you all to please join us on this very vital training that's being provided. Again, it's going to be October 5th, 6th, and 7th in Chicago. The training is 100% free. The only thing that, if you're going to be joining us from out of town is, working your way about getting there. But to attend the training, which by the way, costs a significant amount per individual, but Islamic Relief is covering that cost for you all, guys. So again, just as long as you can make it to the Chicagoland area, please come join us for this training, October 5th, 6th, and 7th. I'll drop a link in the chat here where you all can sign up if you're interested. Again, signing up does not mean that you're committing to anything, but this way that you will receive updates about, excuse me, the training. You'll receive some pre-course material and things like that. And again, at the completion of the training, you all will receive a certificate of completion and become certified disaster chaplains who will deploy with us, inshallah, and to support not only the Muslim community, but communities all across the United States in a number of disasters, with regard to these types of deployments. There was a question in here I just saw about how do we pay for travel expenses. Travel expenses would be on you all individually. So flights, lodging, and food outside of the training would be your responsibility. But the training itself will be paid for by Islamic Relief. We will provide breakfast, lunch, and dinner during the training. So just come out to Chicago any which way you can. You can fly, you can take a train, drive, horseback. Doesn't matter to me. Just come out there, join us, inshallah, and we will take care of everything else for you. I'll drop the link in the chat. I also did drop my contact information earlier. I'll post that here. Please feel free to reach out to me at any time if you have any questions. I'm happy to help. I'm happy to answer them. And inshallah, in 2024, we look forward to bringing these trainings to your communities as well. So if you're interested in hosting a training in your local community, please let me know, and we'd be happy to see how we can set that up. Jazakumullah khairan to Bayan for, again, putting this together. Jazakumullah khairan to the speakers for coming out and speaking today. And again, Jazakumullah khairan to you all for joining us. And I look forward to seeing you guys in Chicago in October, inshallah. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum.
And now I'd like to introduce our esteemed panelists. Chaplain Tahara Akmal is the Clinical Pastoral Education Manager and a board-certified chaplain at MedStar Washington Hospital Center. She is the first Muslim woman certified by the Association for Clinical Pastoral Education to teach chaplaincy in a clinical setting. Chaplain Tahara is a PhD candidate in the leadership studies at Alvernia University. She is among the first professors to teach chaplaincy at Bayan upon the inception of the Master of Divinity and Islamic chaplaincy degree, and continues to be on the visiting faculty at Bayan today. Chaplain Omar Bajwa serves as a director of Muslim life at Yale University. In addition to 2 graduate degrees, he earned his graduate certificate in Islamic chaplaincy from Hartford Seminary. His interests include Islam in the United States and the intersection of culture, media, politics, and spirituality. He is also one of the co-editors of the book Mantle of Mercy, Islamic Chaplaincy in North America, which is often used in Bayan courses. And of course, our esteemed moderator, Chaplain Sundus Khaleki, is a board-certified chaplain. She earned an accredited Master's of Divinity degree in Islamic chaplaincy from Bayan. She serves as a hospital chaplain at Hoag Hospital in Irvine. Additionally, she is a chaplain for the Irvine Police Department. She previously served as Vice President of Healthcare for the Association of Muslim Chaplains. Sundus is the author of Musings of a Muslim Chaplain and a co-editor of Mantle of Mercy along with Chaplain Omar. If you have any questions throughout this webinar, please add it to the chat and we'll get to as many as we can at the end. Sundus, I will hand it off to you.
Thank you, Yasmin, so much. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Thank you all for joining us. It's such a pleasure to spend some virtual space with you all, time and space, that is. Let's get right into it. Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. I'm really excited because Chaplain Omar and Chaplain Tahara are my teachers and mentors. And so I was saying earlier that I just have all these questions that I would want to ask them anyway. So I'm going to pretend everyone else is not here and just give it as it is and pick their brains and learn from them so we can all benefit, inshallah. So I wanted to start the conversation unpacking some of these terms that we might hear every day, like chaplain and community. So we can start with kind of exploring the meaning behind them. So I'm thinking specifically that when I'm reading a lot these days about chaplains and in chaplaincy literature, how they're defining the field of chaplaincy, I'm noticing that there's this language around chaplains existing in what they call the in-between, kind of like we're religious professionals in these religious groups, but we exist in non-religious spaces. Outside of congregations, outside of churches, mosques, synagogues, temples, etc. And as America, as a nation, is growing increasingly non-religious, especially amongst their Christian constituency, more Americans are also finding community outside of religious groups and congregations, like in conversation like what am I thinking of? Sports, hobbies, the workplace. They're finding grouping and belonging in those spaces instead of faith congregations. So given kind of this context and this background in the current discussion on chaplaincy and in community, I'm really curious to ask Chaplain Omar and Chaplain Tahra their thoughts on how they would define chaplaincy and how they define community. So given, Chaplain Omar's context, for example, as a university chaplain, some of the studies that I've read, Chaplain Omar, put the non-religious kind of population on college campuses, especially among students, at 60%. So what does that mean for your work as a chaplain for Muslim students and non-Muslim students as well? And Chaplain Tahar, in the healthcare system, you are a chaplain and an educator training the next generation of chaplains, which can be a very diverse group. In your cohort, you have people of different faiths and no faiths, both as chaplaincy students and in the hospital. How does that play a role in how you do your work and how you define this work? And I'd love for this to be a conversation, between the three of us, so anyone could kind of jump in, and I don't mind getting interrupted and all of that. So I know I threw a lot out there, but just kind of starting to build that out. Bismillah.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you, Sundus, and thank you everyone who's here to have this conversation. I want to thank Bayan for inviting me to have this conversation with you all and to think together about chaplaincy and how we as Muslims engage in this very sacred work. Sundus, what's standing out for me is what you said, chaplains in community. I think that's a perfect description of what we do in a hospital setting. Because I think you said something about chaplains are considered religious professionals. However, we don't fully focus on religious issues. So for example, in a hospital setting, while we have the role as spiritual religious caregiver, our role is to go into the room or to meet with people and staff to find out what is meaningful to them. So religion could be part of that conversation, and religion may not be part of that conversation. So what we're doing is providing, like you just said, Sundus, community. We are companions. We have religious knowledge, and the way I think about myself as a chaplain, and I know Basma just mentioned our class. I hope I said this in the class. And I say this to my CPE students. My Islamic identity, all that I know that is beautiful and connects me with humanity from Islam, I see it as kind of in a backpack that I carry. It's part of my identity. It's part of me. But when I lead, as I move out, I'm leading with my heart. In Islam, we have this model from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and our beloved prophet, peace be upon him, of compassion, loving kindness. So as I'm moving around through the hospital or with students, I think about the tradition of where we have in the hadith that for every step that we take towards meeting someone who's struggling or sick, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala envelops us in mercy. So I'm leading with this sense of compassion and love and curiosity about whom I'm going to meet and what they're struggling with or what they're celebrating, to connect in community and relationship. And my Islamic tradition gives me all of this, like a beautiful picture or model of how to be kind, how to be loving, how to be compassionate, how to show up for people, understanding that my role is to serve humanity, not just the Muslims or certain groups. So I think that's kind of how I see chaplaincy within a hospital setting, and how I myself have developed my own identity drawing from Islamic tradition. The very foundation of loving kindness is my foundation. So that's how I think chaplaincy in community can apply to a healthcare setting.
What you're saying, Chaplain Tahara, is just so reminiscent of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu rahmatan lil alameen, right? You reference that it's not just rahmatan lil muslimin, right? It's not just for Muslims. It's not just for one particular group, but it's for all of creation. All of creation.
All of creation, absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned that. All of creation.
Our thoughts?
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you so much to Bayan for sponsoring this. Thank you so much to my friends and teachers and colleagues, Chaplains Tahira and Sundus, for being here today. And thank you all of you for joining us on today's event. Just to jump right into it, I really like the way that you framed it in terms of sort of talking about defining chaplaincy and community. I'll give quick sort of working definitions from my perspective, and then I'll address the question of in my local context on a campus. You know, I think the standard, and I like the standard definition of sort of the traditional definition of chaplaincy, is as someone's a spiritual caregiver in an institutional setting. And I think that sort of those definitions are changing a little bit because we have 4 traditional models, healthcare, higher education, prison, and military, but now we're emerging in new spaces where we see community chaplaincy, and we've already talked a little about that, and I hope we get deeper into that conversation as well. Disaster chaplaincy is an emergent field as well. So the takeaway from that for me is someone that offers pastoral/spiritual care in an institutional setting, which means it's not a traditional house of worship, right? That you're really on the ground, embedded in many ways, like literally in the trenches, day-to-day people's lives. And then the second thing is community. And, you know, when I was reflecting on the questions that we were asked to prepare, you know, community is a buzzword now. Everyone loves talking about this. I operate on a college campus, and this is from higher ed administrators. This is the language. This is what they want us to talk about: creating community, nurturing community. And I get it. I understand it. But then it's an elusive term, right? How do you define it? I think it to different people means different things. So I'm going to offer a definition that I think is just workable for now. Sort of 2-3 quick things. One is, I think you honestly have to have people have to have interest in living together. Like they have to want to be in community, right? That you can't just take a random assortment of people that aren't engaged and interested in being together. That it's just not going to work. So I think that's interest is number one. Number two is you have to have shared some shared basis, right? Whether it's shared ethics, shared morals, shared values, shared vision, right? That there's something that is bringing them together. To me, that's the next level. Now, I would say from our perspective, this is the higher purpose of our deen, right? That we're called to be we are actually already part of the ummah of the best of creation, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then we have higher objectives, right? That we're called to in this life. And the last is that you have to offer opportunities to people. Once you have people together, they want to do something. And so whether this is like opportunities to engage with interpersonal opportunities for families and children, whether this is professional opportunities, these are shared spiritual opportunities, right, for engagement. To me, these are like the building blocks of it. And I love the word that you used in the intro was this, also a buzzword right now on college campuses, is this idea of belonging. And I think this is really at the essence of it, because maybe we'll get to unpack this a little later. There's so much data right now that's coming out. So many people are writing on. We have an epidemic of loneliness. It's what in sociology they call, what Emil Durkheim called anomie, this sense of meaninglessness, of disconnection, of alienation, that we find this at multiple levels of society. And to answer the last part to your intro is I work on a college campus, and you have young, vibrant, driven, interested people that are looking for a lot of things, and one of which is that they want community. And chaplains, I think, are well positioned in that context. Irrespective, I might say, of their religious affiliation, I think it's that we are another opportunity, or we create opportunities on campuses for people to connect. And you rightfully cited the data, the increasing numbers of lack of religious affiliation. And to some people, that's scary. I think for other people, that's an interesting opportunity, is that to rethink what community looks like and how to engage and reach out to people. Because at the end of the day, one of the things I will say about what that distinguishes higher ed chaplaincy slightly from other forms of chaplaincy is that you're on an educational endeavor, right? And in that educational endeavor, if it's done well, is you're looking for deeper meaning making, right? And at that age of 18, 20, 22, you're looking for like, what does it all mean? How am I going to figure this out in my life? And I think chaplains can be really useful interlocutors and conversation partners in that. So.
Beautifully laid out for us, Chaplain Omar. Chaplain Zahra, did you want to respond to that or build upon that in terms of like a community definition or what you were hearing?
Yeah, I was just thinking about the COVID pandemic. One of the things that we learned during COVID, when we were displaced from our houses of worship and from our communities, or those places where we found belonging, or we could, be ourselves, was we started to create our own, or to define for ourselves what community means. And I agree that it's going to mean different things to different people. Houses, even though there's, according to some of the statistics, there is some decrease in having people come back to their houses of worship post-COVID, although things are opening up. I think people are finding I think we're looking more at the definition of spirituality. That's just something that's happening within our conversations. Because someone can be spiritual and not really identify with the religion, and someone can be deeply religious and say, well, I'm not really spiritual. I follow these tenets and the doctrines of this faith, and I'm very religious. So I think part of community too is finding out what is meaningful to people. Maybe being in a community where everyone worships the same and believes in the same scriptures, maybe one sense of community. Someone may feel that they have more of an eclectic spirituality and love being with people of different faiths. So it's going to be different for everyone. And one thing I find in the healthcare setting, which is my context, teaching CPE students who, like I think some just mentioned, is usually a very diverse group, majority Christian, is we have these conversations about how do we create community in these pluralistic environments? How do we create community just in our little 5, 6, 7 cohort where everyone's coming from different backgrounds? And how do we, and one of the very first questions for those of you who have done CPE to get your clinical training, the first question in your application is, who are you? You know, what are you bringing to this experience as a chaplain from your religion, your family experiences, who you are, family system, your identity? What are you bringing to this work to serve humanity that is going to help you or that might push you away? So even as you're going through CPE, you're constantly thinking about, what is community? How do I serve people who are different? How do I respect people who are different? So it's a constant conversation about who is community, who's our neighbor, who are those people we serve, and how do we serve them?
We have a question here in the chat, Chaplain Tahara, if you want to kind of unpack these words as well. Somebody who may not be familiar with the difference between spiritual and religious, how would you describe that?
Yeah, so the way I see spirituality and religion, so if I say I'm a religious person, what that could mean is that I have a particular religion that I'm attached to. I'm Christian, Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, and that is where I find my meaning. That's where I find my community. That's where I find my authority for my life through that scripture, for my decision making, and I want to live out my life according to that religious doctrine. Where spirituality could be someone who believes in something outside of themselves. I believe in a divine or something outside of myself, but I'm not sure where I fit. I'm not sure if I'm Christian, but I do believe in something, and I'm a more spiritual person. So my meaning may come from, instead of going to church on Sundays or Juma on Fridays, maybe my sense of meaning is going out and hiking and looking at Allah's beautiful creation. Or maybe my family gives a nice, wonderful sense of connection. So I'm deeply spiritual, but I don't necessarily affiliate myself with a particular religion. So as chaplains, chaplains have to do according to the Joint Commission, which accredits hospitals. The hospitals that are accredited by JCAHO have to have someone, and it's typically the chaplain, who does a spiritual assessment. And part of the spiritual assessment is recognizing, is this person, like when they are admitted, they'll say, what religion are you? Would you like to see a chaplain? But when the chaplain shows up, we're doing an assessment about what is meaningful. It could be religion. It could be their cat at home who they're missing terribly and they are worried about the cat. It could be their role in society. It could be what gives them meaning, can be so many other things. So I don't just simply want to hear about, okay, what's your religion? Tell me about your religion. What are those other things that are meaningful? Where would you be if you weren't here? Who are the people who love you and are thinking about you, maybe lifting you up in prayers or thoughts while you're here? So you're doing this holistic assessment to understand people best we can on a holistic basis. So religion can be part of it. I think because of the ruh, or the soul, the spirit that Allah puts in all of us around 4 months in utero, I think we all have this spirit of love and kindness that we have within us. But people are going to find meaning in life in different ways. And that's part of the role of the chaplain who's in the hospital. Please tell me, let me get to you, what's meaningful to you. Not that you ask it that way, but I don't know. I hope that's helpful. I hope I didn't go kind of outside the parameters, but that's how I see it.
Any additions, Chaplain Omar?
That was a fantastic definition. I have nothing that I was taking notes. I mean, that was great.
I know me too. So far we've begun to draw a picture of what we're looking at when we think of chaplaincy and community. So we're starting to define chaplaincy, hopefully for the audience and for all of us, as religious professionals, as we talked about, those who are immersed and have a foundation in a religious tradition. For us as Muslims, not just Islam, as Chaplain Tahara gave us that beautiful metaphor of us carrying that as our like backpack of tools and what informs our way of being with people and how we serve people and how we try and emulate the prophetic way of service, which is rahmatan lil alameen, mercy to all of creation. All of these qualities we're pulling from our own faith tradition. And yet, as chaplains, we are also there for everybody. So whether that looks like, college students on a campus, or those who are incarcerated in a correction setting, or patients and staff and families in a healthcare setting, or also chaplaincy students, you can see the different ways that chaplains step into these spaces that are not quite defined outwardly as a religious space. It's not a church, it's not a masjid, it's not somewhere that someone would go to worship. And yet you have people who are deeply spiritual and deeply religious and still want to find ways to pull in those value systems and that those principles into what is happening to them at that stage of life. If they're in the hospital and sick, using perhaps religion or using some sort of value system to understand, why is this happening to me? Or a college student on campus, maybe for the first time thinking about, what is my religion and how does this really play a role in my identity and who I am, apart from my family system, apart from my parents, apart from my upbringing. And the chaplain is then somebody who can come in and have those kinds of deeper conversations beyond the teaching or the preaching elements of our faith. And so going a little bit deeper now into the next step, can you both of you, can you give some personal examples of how you as a chaplain created community in your context for anybody, whether it's for Muslims, for non-Muslims? As chaplains, we've got stories, lots and lots of stories. And I'm hoping that you've got one that maybe illustrates well what we're trying to bring here to the audience.
Would you like to go ahead?
Chaplain Tahara, do you want to start?
Oh, do you want me to start? Oh, okay, yeah, sure. So at Washington Hospital Center in DC, we've been blessed to have some funding to have a part-time imam who has come and joined us now. And what he does, or I've been a part of that, attending to the needs of the Muslim patients and the Muslim staff that work at Washington Hospital Center. So part of my role was helping to organize Juma before he came, we have a WhatsApp chat group that another Muslim student who came, and Lauren Schreiber, she does community community chaplaincy, and she came to our center for CPE. So we started a WhatsApp group for Muslim associates. And then eventually, alhamdulillah, we were able to get some funding, and we have a chaplain who comes, an imam who comes and gives Juma on Friday and tends to the Muslim patients. So I was part of that, and I'm kind of somewhat in charge of maintaining that and making sure that the chapel's ready, that we are able to get the chairs out and work side by side with the imam to make sure that we have Juma. So that's one of the ways we support the Muslim patients and the Muslim associates at Washington Hospital Center, and having that community. For non-Muslims, though, I have a story that I'm thinking about in my very first CPE unit, where I was really just trying to figure out my identity as a Muslim chaplain who was raised in a family where my mother was Christian and my father was Muslim. And so I grew up watching people of two different faith traditions love, respect one another. They never argued about religion. So this was my model of how you engage with people of other traditions. And my father, I guess maybe enjoyed reading religious books, because we had like the Bible, the Torah, we had religious books in our house. So I was always really curious about people and their traditions. So when I found chaplaincy my path for my career, I did my first unit of CPE at Ohio State in Columbus, Ohio, while I was in seminary at Claremont School of Theology. And I remember walking into a room of an older lady, and when I got in, she gave me the hand. I walked in, she saw my badge, it said chaplain, she gave me the hand, and she judged me by my appearance and hijab, and she says, you don't believe what I believe. And I said, oh, I said, well, if you like, I would love to hear what you believe if you like to. And then she kind of perked up. She's like, oh, okay. And what I was doing in that moment, I didn't realize it now, but I think I was saying to her, it's not about me. I'm really curious about you. I want to know about you. I'm a chaplain, yet that doesn't mean I'm imposing anything on you or my faith on you. I'd love to hear what you believe. And so we sat down and we talked. And then over time, she had me coming back, and she would like me to come at when it was time. She was in there for a while. She would ask me to come at the right before she went to sleep and pray with her. And we just developed, I was like community for her. She's a Catholic woman. And then I remember one day I was coming out of the elevator and I saw her daughter, and she said, oh, chaplain, my mom just loves your visits. Please keep them up. So, the assumption that because we're from different traditions doesn't, we may have an assumption, and we all do this. We will size someone up and judge them by their appearance. But unless we allow our curiosity to engage that person and try to develop a relationship or community, we can have lost opportunities. So had I said, oh, okay, we believe differently, so let me go, thank you. But no, I think it comes from my tradition from Islam. I love the verse in the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I created you different, not so you're gonna like pull away or not like each other. For me, it's an invitation to be curious. I created you different, like not so you push away from each other, but you get to know each other. Let me know about her Catholic tradition. How is it meaningful for her? And I remember at one point asking, well, what's your favorite scripture in the Bible? Oh, chaplain, it's this. And she told me about it, and she took out her Bible. But I was interested in her, and I provided that community for her to go back to our original where we started. But I think that it's so important as a chaplain to remember, and again, this is why metaphor with the backpack, that my Islam, it impacts how I can be kind and how I can love and engage people, and through loving kindness. It's not about me in that moment. Even with the Muslim, I can't assume if I'm with a Muslim patient or Muslim family that they believe and see Islam exactly the way I do. I still have to be curious with that Muslim family to understand how they see Islam, or how they understand it, or how Islam is going to impact or not their decision making. So I'll stop there, but those are just a couple of my little stories, and thank you for letting me to share those.
Thank you, Chaplain Taha. I echo Iman's comment. It's so powerful and so prophetic. SubhanAllah. Truly, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was such a model for us in the way that he engaged people of all diverse backgrounds. And really, it's like, I like to think of chaplaincy when you're sitting, facing somebody. Everything kind of the exterior, we like to say, melts away, or we hope melts away, and what are the ones that are really talking in their hearts. So if we imagine even physically, when we're facing one another, our hearts are facing one another, and those are really the ones in communication, metaphysically and physically, was the hope. Chaplain Omar, I'd love to hear one of your stories as how you as a chaplain create community in your context.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chaplain Taha. In fact, I want to pull a thread that you just touched on, which is, I think, at the heart of what you're saying too, which very much aligns to my experience as well. This idea of really connecting with the whole person. So I'll share an example. When alhamdulillah, I've been at Yale for 15 years now in this setting. And when I came, one of the really amazing pieces of advice I got was, I think, in like my first week of work here. And it was a very daunting, opening when I started working here. And one of my colleagues said, addressing actually a room full of students, and said, one of the key differences between our engagement with students in this very powerful formative time in their lives versus faculty, and I have many friends who are faculty, and I also teach as well in a capacity, is that, at one level, these institutions really only, I'm just going to be straightforward here, they really value your intellectual capacity and output. That's why they're there. That's why you're there. That's why you are important to them. Is that what can you do in the classroom, in the seminar, in the lab? And that's why at the end of the day, they're there and you're there in that perspective. from our perspective, we are there to care about the whole person. Like, we want to get to know you. We want to know your life story. This idea that Chaplain Tahara mentioned, the spiritual assessment or that holistic assessment. I want to know who you are. We all have stories. We all come from places. We are at moments now, and we have dreams and visions of where we want to go. And I think chaplains are really invested in those conversations, like long, form conversations. And I think that that's like a really beautiful, profound thing that is also prophetic from the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, right? Building community. This is the glue, is that I care about you and want to know about who you are and want you to be here. And I think that that in some ways, in this hyper-connected world, is almost in many paradoxical, ironic ways missing, right? How many people are actually invested in, besides just their family, right? Or their circle of besties, like how many people in the rest of their lives? So that actually, and I'll mention one more thing about in terms of stories, I'll just divide it with sort of the non-Muslim students that I engage with regularly. It's just, people are suffering. This is a very harsh, unkind world that we're in. And these are very harsh, unkind spaces. And people are suffering in different ways at different levels. And I think to take the time to say, I want to get to know you. I'm here to listen. We lead with listening. As you said, we lead with our hearts. That's what it's all about. I think that that's what people are looking for. And I think non-Muslims, it resonates with them, because we say, He's Allah's muqallibul qulub, the creator and changer of hearts, right? So it's really, in my mind, tapping into that core element of our tradition. And then with the Muslim community, I think it gets a little more, you can get to more nuts and bolts, right? Because I also, lead Jummah and give khutbahs and teach in my setting on campus. It's that co-curricular engagement with students, about teaching and preaching with them, but making opportunities. And I'll add one more thing that I think in my context is specific, just in the interest of time. We work in very competitive environments where, Yale is super guilty of this, is that people come in from day one and it's all about competition for your teachers, attention, the administration's, awards, all of this kind of stuff, which can be very toxic and very unhealthy, right? So what we really try to model and create is this ethic of cooperation, right? How, as your chaplain, can I help you in the classroom, outside of the classroom, in the musalla, outside of the musalla, in our community, outside of your friend circle? And if that means being a mentor, if that means connecting you to people with alumni, with people out there in the working world that can be, can help you, I think that that is also a unique perspective that we bring. Really, that ethic of cooperation versus feeding into the competition.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Incredible work that you do, Chaplain Omar, both of you, and Chaplain Tahara. And Chaplain Omar, as you were speaking, I was thinking of just the importance of community, and how time and time again, even in our tradition, this is a quality that is emphasized subtly and also overtly. But I think in the more subtle components of it, we're not meant to accomplish or just be in this world on our own. We need mentors, we need teachers, we need companions. And I love that you offered up all of those definitions or opportunities that a chaplain can give. A chaplain can be your friend, a chaplain can be your teacher, a chaplain can be your mentor, a chaplain can be your advocate. All of these labels and qualities. And if we even think about the 5 pillars of Islam, we can't do any of the 5 pillars without community. From Shahada all the way down to Hajj, we need other people in order to fulfill the basic obligations and commands of our own faith. This is not a faith about doing things individually or being an individual. And so thinking about both of your stories, and one of the aspects that you continue to bring up about chaplaincy, and I think is really important, is the diversity that you encounter on a daily basis, whether it's diversity within the Muslim group that you have, whether it's on campus or at the hospital, going and moving outwards into kind of the other faith groups, and then people of no faiths at all. How do you create community amongst people of such diversity, whether it's within the Muslim Student, Association on campus, or the Muslims at the hospital? And we heard a little bit about how you connect with non-religious folks, but what is it about chaplains specifically and uniquely that allow us or give us kind of a platform to be able to bring people who maybe don't define community the same way, or don't have the same values even? How do we create connection between them?
I'll jump in with two quick, just sort of ingredients. I'll say is one is I think that, which from my understanding is that really at the heart of what chaplaincy is creating a non-judgmental, non-anxious presence. Right, that we live in systems and are embedded in systems, sometimes family systems even, right, like just very unhealthy situations where there's a lot of judgment. Sadly, you know, this is not unique to us, right? I mean, many as Muslims, many religious communities talk about judgment and anxiety that's produced from that, from being judged for not being religious enough, spiritual enough, good enough, welcome enough in the community. So one is creating a non-anxious, non-judgmental presence to the best of our ability, so that people actually feel like the door is open. You've opened the door and I will feel welcome to walk through the door and to begin to join you, right? And then you let people come on their own terms. That's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say is what in my setting we call the ministry of gastronomy. Is food is the secret sauce, right? Is that if you feed people, they will come. And I work in an institution in a setting that, you know, after Jummah, I can, you know, offer people food, and it's unique to my setting perhaps versus other forms of chaplaincy. But I think this is like, you know, you go back to the khutbah of the Prophet ﷺ when he entered Medina, one of the key pieces of advice, the khutbah is literally like a few sentences long, right? Is that afshu salam, spread the peace, feed the people. You know what I mean? Like that is, there's a deep, deep wisdom in that. Because I think food is naturally, you know, we have the idea of breaking bread, right? Of welcoming people to your table. And it opens doors. So that's two things I would put out there.
Yeah, I think about the hadith of our Prophet, peace be upon him, to want for humanity what we want for ourselves. So that right there, it gives me a foundation for community. Excuse me. And chaplaincy is a very unique role because we're having these encounters with strangers. It's very different than if someone went to the mosque or their church and wanted to talk to the clergy there about something that's going on in their life, some suffering or an issue in their life. My experience is that some of the people I've talked to find some comfort in talking to chaplains because maybe they feel ashamed or maybe they feel like their local clergy, they don't want to be judged, or you know, it's just sometimes there's just feelings about going to their clergy that make them nervous for whatever reason. And talking to a chaplain, because of maybe what you said, Chaplain Omar, chaplains are taught to be a non-judgmental presence with people, and to see that people as human and that we all suffer, we all struggle. So I thought about that and I was just thinking, you know, chaplaincy is a unique relationship, or a chaplain has a unique relationship that doesn't bring that judgment, and is there to listen and to hold people in their suffering. So perhaps that's a way of building community with non-Muslims. And I also thought about when COVID hit and a lot of programs were being shut down in our area. CPE programs were not open. Our hospital, our leadership in our hospital in DC said, we will keep chaplaincy. We will keep our CPE students. There's a huge need here. We have people here who are dying alone, who are suffering. That was when we didn't have the vaccine and COVID was, I mean, we were terrified. And the hospital leadership made the decision that our chaplains and our CPE students would remain. So it was a very tough situation, but we were showing up for people whose family couldn't come in. So chaplains show up when people are grieving, when they're suffering, when they might not feel the best about themselves. And in the dictionary of pastoral care and counseling, it has a definition about illness. It says when people are suffering, they have questions, they can question God, they can feel ashamed, they have all these emotions. And then it says, but this can happen in the best of health. It's not just chaplaincy. I mean, excuse me, it's not just when you're ill, but it can happen at any time. And so I think we have a very unique role to be that non-judgmental presence where people can have a soft place to fall, talk about who they are or what's troubling them without a fear of being judged. So again, that helps me to connect with people of different faith traditions. I'm not there to determine, you know, what path they're on and if it's right or wrong, or if my path's better. I'm there to be that person who can listen to them as Chaplain Omar said, with a non-judgmental presence. And COVID, often people were of different traditions, different cultures, spoke different languages. In that time of death, we were all there grieving with each other. And so I think it goes back to this wanting for humanity, what you want for yourself. If my loved one was dying in a hospital and I'm 1,000 miles away, I would want anyone to show up and be compassionate and loving to my loved one. So
It reminds me of a time that I was in the hospital, and it was during COVID, and there was a patient of the Hindu faith who was in an isolation room and wasn't doing very well in the intensive care unit. And I remember being on the phone with the daughter, because that was a time where no visitors were allowed, especially in those sensitive units. And she was very tearful, and she said, what would you do if it was your dad in there and you were on the phone with me? And that really, turned the entire situation around for me. And in that moment, I just remember thinking, whatever I can do for this patient and this daughter, I'm going to try really hard to do. And she was asking me to say a specific prayer from the Hindu tradition for her father that was really important to her family, that was recited there. And, after taking a look at the, and this might be an example of how chaplains sometimes navigate these different theological beliefs and principles. I took a look at the prayer, and it was not something that I could authentically say without it contradicting my own theology and my beliefs. And so what we did is we had iPads specific to the unit, and I was able to pull up that prayer through YouTube, kind of like we find different, Quran reciters and whatnot, and we can play that in the room. So I was able to find that particular prayer and sent in the iPad with the nurse and said, could you please just have this on repeat, just to make sure that that patient was able to hear that while he was in the room, and know that that was a sign that his family was there for him and praying for him as well. In the interest of time, I just kind of want to steer the conversation, and I have two ways that I want to do this. I'm going to try and combine them, and forgive me if it seems random, but we started off the conversation talking about the increase in just kind of the secular, the rise towards secularism in America, and how people are moving away from religion, how chaplains sometimes can step into those spaces between religion and spirituality and meet the needs of that specific population. I'm curious to hear, just anecdotally, do you find that the same is happening for Muslims in your context? That Muslims are, both of you brought up the examples of wanting to approach clergy or wanting to approach somebody from the faith, or kind of speaks the same language as somebody from that faith background, but doesn't want to be judged, or doesn't want to feel like, I haven't checked off all the boxes, so maybe I don't qualify to be able to sit in the presence of this, clergy person or this faith institution. Anecdotally, do you get the sense that Muslims are kind of moving in that way as well? And then the second part of that question, which has almost nothing to do with it, but maybe it does, is kind of on a larger scale. We talked a lot about your specific context. So on campus, in the hospital, do you take your chaplain hat off when you leave work? What does being a chaplain look like for you kind of in the larger community when you're out and about, and kind of connecting this also to Islamic relief and disaster chaplaincy? If, God forbid, la samahullah, a disaster were to break out, what can chaplains, how would you move in that space? What can you offer, whether it's in your context or just the larger Muslim community or the larger human community? So maybe one of you could tackle one of them, or do a little bit of both. And then we'll move into some of the questions in the chat, inshallah.
I can say something just from experience about the Islamic relief disaster chaplaincy training. I took that training in 2012, and mashallah, it helped me to understand, the difference between showing up for someone in the different sectors of chaplaincy and what happens to people in general during a traumatic experience like PTSD and so forth. So I think that is well needed. I remember when we did it, there were very few Muslims, if any, working with the VOADs or the volunteer organizations to do disaster chaplaincy. where we have evolved. I know Respect Graduate School just did a beautiful training for disaster chaplains after the Turkey, Syria earthquake. So that to me shows growth in our community in getting our chaplains and people prepared for these unexpected disasters. So I see a growth there. Also, just from my personal experience, and I'll get to your question, Sundus. When I started my journey to chaplaincy and then later became, started training to be a CPE educator, I started training to be an educator in 2011. It wasn't until a few years ago I had my first Muslim student, CPE student, just because of, at that time, there weren't a lot of us involved. I remember we had Hartford Seminary that was like the main hub for Islamic chaplaincy. But since then, steadily every year I've been having a Muslim CPE student. This year, I think I will have 2 for 2023. So what that means to me is about our community is this growth and interest in Islamic chaplaincy. So what does that mean about our community? And is there a need perhaps, and we've talked about this in my class and other circles, what would it look like if masjids had chaplains? What would it look like if there was an imam to run the day-to-day activities of the masjid, and then we had chaplains to help with family matters and so forth? So that came up for me. And I think I forgot the question now, I kind of went off, but you said something about disaster chaplaincy, so I wanted to make that point about how excellent the training is. And then also what I see in this trajectory of where we're going as Muslims in getting trained in this sacred work. I see an increase in Muslims getting involved in CPE, and there's been a huge growth of seminaries across the United States that are offering chaplaincy degrees now.
Thank you so much. Chaplain Omar.
Yeah, no, thank you. That was a really fantastic answer. And actually, I'm going to just pull a thread from that as well, which is that I think that, I wrote it down, I put in capital letters, like showing up is such at the heart of what this work is. And I've actually had the benefit of studying with Dr. Chaplain Tahir Akmal and hearing her speak, is this idea of the ministry of presence, right? That's really at the core of chaplaincy. And in my mind, that's the prophetic path, right? This is like the Prophet was there in people's lives. He was invested. He was there with them in times of joy, and he was there in times of pain and agony and suffering as well. So that idea of presence, I just want to take that in one direction here, which is that many of my friends are imams. They serve communities in that capacity, and there's a lot of talk, and we alluded to this a little earlier, is that are people drifting towards the masjid, away from the masjid? It's an open-ended question and whatnot. I can tell you from that perspective is that our imams are overworked, right? And so, it's wonderful to expect our houses of worship to be hospitals for the spiritually seeking and the spiritually unwell, etc. But there's also a capacity problem. And so what I would say there is that for those that are willing to bring that ministry of presence, get the training, and really to show up and to help the community to say, what are the unmet needs that you have? And how can I, with my skill set, with my training, with my network, how can I help contribute to the wellness of our community and helping people? I'll just put that out there as well. The other dimension of your question is that, do we take it off? I think it's a personal question for every chaplain. I'm mindful that for sisters that wear the hijab, is that you're publicly representing Islam everywhere you go, and especially if you're a chaplain and you're a Muslim chaplain and you're publicly representing Islam and you're a muhajjabi. I get that. I would say the point that I want to make is, I feel like if you do it in a way, it just sort of becomes who you are, right? Like you walk in the world with eyes of looking at where are the places of pain, where are the places of neglect, where are the ruptures in the world around me. And it's not like I'm taking on some superhero mantle, right? It's just that thing, like, this is the hadith of the Prophet. You find something, distressing, something harmful on the path, and you remove it from the path. And so if the path I walk through every day with my neighbor, with people on the bus, with people in my office, with people that I run into in random encounters in life when I'm not in my office or my workplace, and if that, like in that moment, there's a moment of kindness that is called for, a moment of compassion, a moment of slowing down, I think that I interpret that as that, like, yes, we can take that chaplaincy, ethic into the world around us. And the last thing I'll say is this, fully well aware that burnout is real, right? That there is compassion fatigue is real. And that we have to be very mindful of what our limits are. But these are aspirational sort of ideas.
Beautifully said. I think you outlined both kind of sides of the equation. That yes, this is a prophetic stance that we can argue is not just for chaplains, right? All of us as Muslims should aspire to be in this sort of compassion leading posture and comportment, but at the same time, there are some times where you just have to like shut that part down a little bit and take a break from constantly scanning, assessing, and wanting to meet the needs of others, because our bodies have rights over us and our families have rights over us and all of that. We need to also be present to ourselves and others. So beautifully said to be able to outline both of those. There was a question here earlier that I thought would be important to clarify as well, because we talk a lot about serving both Muslims, non-Muslims, Muslims, non-Muslims, and those of no faith. And there's a question that came up, beautiful, curious question, as how do you do the work without losing yourself in the process? And the clarification to that was, I will accept others, but how you protect your own belief system as well doing that. So some talk around how do you as a Muslim then navigate, listening to others' belief systems, theology, perhaps reading from their scriptures or accepting, their interpretation of their scriptures. I think this is an important question that comes up often when people hear about our work.
One of the things that I had to do when I started down the path of chaplaincy is I started looking at Islam and saying, where are these connections I have with humanity? And one of the verses in the Quran that I kind of see as my part of my theological foundation is the verse that says, Allah has created different paths, and it's not, I'm paraphrasing it, different paths, and it's not for us to dispute about which path is right or wrong, that Allah says instead, I compete in acts of goodness or kindness. So that is very helpful for me as part of my foundation to see my role is not, it doesn't, how do I say, I don't feel a tension actually when people tell me what's meaningful to them, if it's from the Bible, the Torah. For me, I'm learning about them. And I believe I take it from the Islamic tradition of our example of our prophet, peace be upon him, who engaged all people. But that verse of the Quran where Allah says, don't expect everybody to be the same, and don't expect, us to be cookie cutter. But again, I've made you different so you can be curious about each other. So when I'm sitting with someone, and like the lady I was sharing wanted to read her favorite Bible verses to me, I was like, alhamdulillah, she trusts me, a Muslim woman. This is like 6 years post 9/11, when we were looked at as the enemy. Older, Caucasian, deeply Catholic woman is reading what's meaningful to her, to me, and I'm there to receive it. So again, I think Islam gives us a beautiful foundation for this work. Beautiful. I don't experience anything in Islam that contradicts caring for humanity, allowing people to say who they are and what they believe. And just one other thing. So there was another part of your question. Maybe it'll come back. It'll come back to me but I'll just stop there. It'll come back.
That was beautifully said. I would say, just to supplement that, is that, in my mind, like you just have to, that's why we have our spiritual practices, right? We have our salah. I'm just looking at it from a slightly different like prism angle, right? Which is that we have our salah, we have our dhikr, we have our Quran. Like, in my mind, if we have our own dedicated, diligent spiritual practices, it's literally in the DNA of our deen, right? Is that these are meant to be life, like iman giving, right? Like I fill my spiritual well, right? Every day, ideally, inshallah. And then I go into the world, right? And by being exposed to other people's traditions and scriptures, I agree completely with what Chaplain Tahira said, is that it's not in any way like offensive or like anxiety producing. It's like, wow, I'm grateful to Allah that I have what I have, And this is so fascinating. These people are finding meaning from other, other sources. And if anything, it's actually thought provoking, right? Like, oh, wow, what is it about this dimension of their scripture or their ritual or their practice that they find meaningful? And like, here's what I have in my faith, right? And I mean, we want people, because we see physical unwellness and sickness, we see spiritual unwellness and sickness, we see mental unwellness and a lack of health. I mean, I want people to get better, right? And so if that's what it takes for you to feel better in the moment that you're suffering, is that, and I'm there to help walk that journey with you and to be a resource, etc. I mean, in many ways, and this has already been said, is that, Allah Ta'ala is putting us in that moment with that person, right? What is it that I can offer that person in that moment? But anyway, so more to say, but I'll leave it at that.
Both of you really, I think, covered the basics of this, and I'll just add that it is really important as part of our chaplaincy training, by the way. We not only learn the gifts of presence and ministry of presence and showing up and active listening and non-judgment, but part of the education, especially at Bayan, is the Islamic sciences, right? Like we are trained also in foundations of Islamic sciences to understand why we do the work that we do from the lens of the Quran and from the Sunnah, and that's really what's informing our work. And so when you have that foundation of Islam, then you work out of that. And it doesn't kind of go the other way around. So chaplains are getting kind of the soft sciences and a little bit of the hard sciences as well to be able to. Yes, yeah, please.
Can I add something? In 2004, I think it was, I had one of my mom's sisters, she was sick and she was in Kaiser Hospital in Los Angeles. And I remember this chaplain showing up for us, and he was Christian, and he showed up, and I don't remember what he said. I don't remember his prayer, but it just stayed on my heart that here's this person who doesn't know anything about us. We were told to get my aunt's affairs in orders. They didn't think she was going to make it. And he showed up to provide care for us and support. And that stayed with me, that this person who knew nothing about us, but was there and kept coming and checking on us. It was so powerful and meaningful. And it was part of my journey to help, to steer me towards chaplaincy. So on the flip side, for me to receive chaplaincy from someone who wasn't a non-Muslim, and for it to feel so good and loving and kind, how could I not, offer the same to someone who's of a different tradition? And I'll never forget when my dad passed away. When I got the news, I was actually at my friend's house, and she was having a dinner party. And I remember just like falling on the sofa like this, and the person next to me wasn't a Muslim, but they just let me cry. And I remember they just kind of tapped my arm. They knew I just gotten this devastating news, but they didn't say anything or start speaking about religion. They just were kind and let me be myself in that moment of devastation. So I think it's just very human. The work that we do, it's just, connecting heart to heart with people. And it's, to me, it's an honor to have a role as a chaplain, because I get to live out my Islam so beautifully, right? So.
Basma, just checking in. Do we have time for one more question? Yeah, preach, sister.
Yes.
Yes, okay. So this question didn't come up on the chat, but I'm curious to hear how you both, I don't know if advice is the right word, but guide a Muslim who feels disconnected from community. So somebody, for all our talk about community and the different forms of it, the qualities of it, somebody who perhaps doesn't feel belonging but wants to feel belonging, who has been disconnected from community for certain reasons, or doesn't really have access to community that they feel resonates with them, but are longing for that and want that to be a part of them. Do you have any words for brother or sister who would be feeling that? as a chaplain, speaking from your chaplaincy heart?
I would say that can be a very lonely feeling, an isolating feeling where there aren't people who can resonate with you, or you feel like you can be yourself. I would encourage that person to try and find people where they feel they can truly be themselves, they can be seen and heard, they can find support and love. Love and belonging is a natural human need. We were talking about this a couple weeks ago in our class. To be respected, to seen as someone with a bit of power and agency, and respected, and to feel like you're being loved and cared for. And if you're in a space where you don't feel that, I would fully encourage you to find a space and reach out maybe to chaplains who can help connect you with, or resources where people can connect you to a community where you feel safe and you can be yourself and find love and community. That is so important, because I think trust is being in a place where you trust the others, you trust the chaplain, you trust your peers is so important. That you're not going to be harmed, that you're not going to be ridiculed, that you're not going to be judged. So I would say, please reach out and find that space for yourself. That's very important.
Yeah, that was beautifully said. I mean, I have nothing to add to that. That's exactly what I was going to say. The only tiny bit I might add is that for someone that is in that situation, I'd really want to sit down with them and to hear their story, and what is it that has, where is the disconnect? Why haven't they been able to find community? To get to know their story. And then, I think a big part of chaplaincy from my perspective is really being a connector, as Chaplain Tara said, is that, like, how can I use my toolbox? What do I have in my toolkit and in my network, is how can I help introduce and connect you to people to help you find that belonging and community. But I need to get to know you. I need to listen, actively and deeply to who you are, which I think was implied in Chaplain Tara's answer. And I think that's what we can offer to people like that. And I mean, you'd be surprised, there's a lot of people out there like that. They want community, they just don't know who to turn to, how to even begin that process. And that's yet one of the many ways that chaplains in across our institutional settings, including in Masajid, right, can help.
Yeah, and I think that, the reality is, and I'll just say it, there have been people in the world who have been harmed by religion. They've been harmed by their houses of worship. So we want to keep that in mind before we send someone to the masjid, like you were saying, Imam Omar, that you want to get to know their story. Where do they not feel? Why don't they feel comfortable in certain spaces? It's just been part of our history that religion has been used in certain contexts. I'm just talking about religion across the board, to get people to, to be a certain way or to do certain things. And, chaplaincy is a different relationship. We're not there to judge. We want to be that, accompanying presence with you to help find space for you where you feel loved and seen and heard.
I know that there are a couple of initiatives here in California that was actually the guiding principle behind founding the establishment. Was, we want this to be a space that you can bring your non-Muslim mother or family member or a Muslim who has been disconnected from community, and you can say the name of this, institution or organization and not hesitate for a single moment that they would be welcomed in warmly. So subhanAllah, I'm hoping and hopeful that more and more of these kind of awarenesses are surfacing for our community, and that our spaces are following suit.
So just may I just add, I think also for women, Muslim women, chaplaincy has a place where we have really lived out our leadership as religious leaders. And you can see that in just by how the shift in webinars and, who are the people speaking about chaplaincy, and women are just really fully living into their religious leadership through chaplaincy. And I love that.
This last question, I think it ties in beautifully. Inshallah, how can we make sure chaplains are an integral part of the masjid theme? Is that like a chaplaincy, Islamic chaplaincy 2.0 perhaps?
I mean, I'll take a quick stab at it, which is that I think it's a great question. Thank you very much. I mean, all of them are a fantastic question. Thank you. I think as was noted, I'm trying to keep an eye on the chat as well, is that we do have a chapter in the book that addresses this by Chaplain Joshua Salam. But what I would say, just in the interest of time, is it's really initiatives like this, right? Like bringing the public into this conversation on what is who are chaplains, what do they do, etc. It increases awareness, number one. Number two, as I alluded to before, is that I mean, from across the country, the imams that I travel to and are friends with and whatnot, is that it's a capacity issue, right? We can't expect them to do all of this. And so therefore, once chaplains get the training and are introduced to the community, and to say, how can I help? What are the unmet needs in this community, right? Working with young professionals, working with people that may be on the fringes, working with young families that are struggling and juggling a lot of things, like, finding that space. I think that is educating the public at large, the Muslim community, at what we offer, and then also to the imams, to saying that, and I'll just say this as a male chaplain, is that sometimes this can be seen as a threat, right? Are you coming in? Are you another religious voice in the community? Is that a threat to the authority of who's running the institution? And to say, I go back to what I said before, it's not about competition. It's really about the ethic of cooperation. And I was literally just at a program in Turkey, I returned yesterday from, and one of our teachers there was talking about, like, the brilliance of the many brilliances of the Sunnah of the beloved Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is this really idea of empowering people and inviting people into creating community and whatnot. But I'll turn the mic over.
I don't have much to add. I thought that was beautifully spoken. I think what chaplains do is we also empower the people that we're speaking to find out what is their own understanding of their faith tradition, what's their own understanding of how they have their own agency or autonomy, and how do they balance out that authority, how they make decisions, but what do they already have within them? Because in a hospital setting, people lose so much. They lose their clothes, they lose their voice, they lose the ability to do the things they want to do. They are grieving maybe their loved ones. So in a hospital, the first ethic of medical ethics is autonomy. Helping people to feel they have some sense of autonomy, some sense of voice. So instead of me going in the room and being that religious authority, I want to hear how they understand Christianity, or how do they understand Islam as they're making these very important decisions about their healthcare. So again, I like that word, empowering. Chaplains aren't there to give all the answers, but we can, really be there to help people see what answers are already within themselves.
Said, Brother Hassan, just from my experience here in Southern California, we've tried to integrate chaplains with the broader imamship or religious leadership group here in Southern California under the Shura Council. And so imams and chaplains, in my experience, have had this partnership where I'll have imams contact me, for example, if there are people from the community who need to be seen in the hospital or on hospice, and I'll try to arrange something around that. And vice versa, if there are fiqh issues that come up in the hospital setting or in other settings, I'll reach out to my imam or sheikh colleagues and ask them, hey, what about this? What happens in this situation? Do you mind talking to this family or coming on in? And so there's a synergy there, and there's an understanding that it's kind of like Chaplain Omar said, we're not threats, we're not competitors to one another, but in fact that we're working together, we're bringing in our different skill sets and our strengths to be able to meet the needs of the Muslim community as a whole. And there are a couple of masajid here as well that are now starting to formally integrate chaplains and chaplaincy into their more, the wider kind of mental and spiritual health initiatives in the masjid in terms of services alongside social workers, licensed therapists and counselors, and they have a chaplaincy element that's just starting up there as well. So I think as more of these webinars happen, and again, this idea of like educating the community, understanding the difference and what benefits a person can have when going to a chaplain, inshallah, that we can kind of fall into line alongside our brothers and sisters who are also trying to serve this community in their beautiful ways and bringing in their strengths and training and education, inshallah. So with that, I will turn it back over to Besma and Yasmin, but not without sincere and deep gratitude to our panelists for bringing your wisdom and your experience and your love and compassion, everything that you bring to your circles every day, giving us just a taste of that here in our virtual space. And also, again, thank you to Bayan for organizing this webinar and giving us this platform and elevating our voices. Thank you all. And thank you, dear attendees, for attending.
Thank you, Sundus.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much, everyone, for such a beautiful and enlightening discussion. I want to say another thank you to Islamic Relief USA for their sponsorship, and to our esteemed panelists, Chaplain Tahara Akmal and Chaplain Omar Bajwa, and our esteemed moderator, Chaplain Sundos Khalaki. If you missed any of this, it will be available via email in the next few days. You can also view previous Bayan chaplaincy webinars and additional resources at bayanonline.org/chaplaincy. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact us at info@bayanonline.org. And to begin your journey of the Master of Divinity program at Bayan, please go to bayanonline.org/apply. Thank you, and we hope to see you again in any of our upcoming events in your community and online. Assalamu alaikum, everyone.
Walaikum salam.
Nice to see you.